Hello, hello, welcome. So beautiful to see nearly 200 people falling in a beautiful waterfall with us this afternoon or evening. Some big faces, some little faces in there. Bonjour, bienvenue. Welcome, wait, so next. Welcome, thanks. We'll just give a little moment for everyone to roll in with us. And so we will just let those spring sounds come to a close. And we'll dive right in. Hi, everybody. My name is Jade Harvey-Beryl, and I'm part of the team at the Outdoor Learning Store. We are the charitable social enterprise that offers outdoor learning equipment and resources for educators and learners while supporting outdoor learning nonprofits. I also work closely with Take Me Outside. They're our partner in delivering this workshop. I join you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Snipes, a land that's also known, fished, hunted, enjoyed by the Okanagan Silks, the Secwepemc, and the Tanaha people. So we know that in the context of outdoor learning where we are, it's fundamental to deepen our understanding of traditional ecological knowledge and to take the time to nurture relationships with the Indigenous people who've called this place home for millennia. And so if it's relevant to your place, we would encourage you to consider what you can do to deepen your understanding. And in this moment, if you would like to share in the chat what Indigenous territories you're joining us from today, we would love.
Thanks, Jade. I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself while you all write your land acknowledgements and where you're joining us from on the chat. So my name is Farheen. I work with Take Me Outside, and I'm joining you from Richmond Hill, Ontario, which is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee people. And on behalf of Take Me Outside and our many outdoor learning partners, welcome to this workshop.
And so a silver lining, thanks Farheen, hello. A silver lining that we could take from the last 2 challenging years is actually the growth in these virtual workshops, and being able to offer these online. We've enabled people from across the world to join us, from those who are more remote or underrepresented. So we're going to take that silver lining with gratitude. Whenever we come here and we see, we just hit 200 participants just in that moment, how great that the passion in this field of outdoor learning is incredible. And in these moments, I feel so connected to people. So thank you for being here and being a part of our community. Quick orientation for those of you joining us, just welcome. So Zoom 101, please stay muted, but leave your video on if you can or desire to. It's really nice as a presenter to look at that screen and see people's faces. Any questions you have, we're going to pose a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please type them in the chat. They won't get lost. Myself and Farheen are collecting them. We're putting them into a document and we will pose them to Kaci-Rae at the end of her presentation. We are recording this, but it really only records the face of the presenter and the slideshow. And we have a live transcript for anyone who might be hearing impaired. So to get things going, just to give us an understanding of who's in the room, I'm just going to launch a quick poll. Thank you for your Indigenous acknowledgements. But where are you joining us from? There are a scroll down. We'll just give it a few seconds. It's just really interesting to know who's joining us today. We've got the whole of Canada and the US covered currently. I'm wondering if there's anyone from the rest of the world. We've been getting people from Korea or the UK or Australia. Yes, there's somebody. Write in the chat if you want to, where you're joining us from outside. Okay, I'm going to count down from 3, 2, 1. Rachel's in Singapore. Hello, welcome. Okay, I'll just share the results with you. We've got lots of Canadians and people from the US and somewhere from everywhere. Thank you so much for joining us. And my final poll is, who are you? So are you a grade teacher? Are you a community or informal educator like I am outside of this? Do you assist or in an admin or support role? Are you more recreational, or your family, or maybe you're not an educator at all? You're just passionate about learning about these things. Just wait a couple more seconds so we get an idea. Thank you so much for sharing with us and joining us. Okay, we're about halfway there. I'm going to just count down from 5, 3, 2, 1. And I'll share with you lots of K-12 teachers, lots of communities, and someone representing everywhere except not being an educator. So we've got a fantastic and diverse group. Thank you for joining. Okay, so the Outdoor Learning Spring Virtual Workshop Series, where we are, is brought to you by a group of over 30 partners and advisors. I'm just going to do a really quick show so you can see who they are and we can thank them. Lots of things on my screen going on, just a moment. Okay, so the School Garden Curriculum, Discovering Science, Ecology and Whole Systems Thinking with author Kaci-Rae Christopher. Our partners are Take Me Outside, PAX Funds, Ecom, Green Teacher, Green Learning, Natural Curiosity, Water Rangers, Seabeam, EAPSA, Wildsight, GEOC, Sask Outdoors, ACE, Stoked on Science, Get Outside and Play, OC, Classrooms to Communities, KBE, Learning for a Sustainable Future, Eco Schools Canada, Imagine Ed, Leave No Trace Canada, Nature for All, Megan Zenny, the NBN, CPAWS and the Outdoor Council of Canada, Oceanwise, Project Wet Canada, Interpretation Canada, the Interpretive Guides Association, Nature Kids BC, and Project Learning Tree. And now joining us, we even have some the Kentucky Association for Environmental Education and a couple of other US organizations are joining us too. So really, we're spreading this beautiful network out on across Turtle Island. And so we come up to our main event here. So the School Garden Curriculum offers a unique and comprehensive framework enabling students to grow their knowledge throughout the school year and build on it from kindergarten to 8th grade. From seasonal garden activities to inquiry projects and science skill building, children will develop organic gardening solutions, positive land ethic, systems thinking, and instincts for ecological stewardship. So I'm incredibly honoured and pleased to host author Kaci-Rae Christopher today. She's going to share more about this incredible resource, strategies to build and structure your own unique gardening program. And Kaci-Rae is an outdoor and garden educator. She works with special education students, collaborates with school teachers to extend gardening into their classrooms. And so I will stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you, Kaci-Rae. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here and hosting, and thank you everyone for being here and participating. I think I will share my screen now. There we go. Okay, and here we go. Okay, well, welcome. That looks good. Wonderful. Yeah, so I just want to say welcome and to express gratitude for being here today with all of you and having you be here. I wanted to start with a quote by a student who she was asked, what are some of the things that you've learned through gardening about people and place and nature? And so this was one of her responses. She said that naturally there's a huge community that comes together or comes around of just really good, nice people when it comes to plants. And that's from Lily. And so I wanted to start that off and really just thank you for being a part of this community and being here today. So just to give you a little bit of background of who I am an outdoor and garden educator, and I am currently working in special education. And I spent the last 10 years working with schools to try to incorporate more garden lessons into the classroom or to bring classes out to a garden space. So that's really my passion and my motivation. As a visual description, I identify as a woman. I'm white, I'm brunette, and I have brown eyes. And currently I feel like all of my needs are being met. And I also want to acknowledge the land that I reside on. I'm in Sisters, Oregon, which is a mountain town in the high desert of Central Oregon. And it's also the traditional homelands of the Northern Paiute, the Wasco, and the Warm Springs peoples. And they are now a part of the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, which is a reservation nation that's just about 40 minutes away. And this is still their home. And I just want to acknowledge this land in that space. And I also want to acknowledge the difficult history in Oregon around exclusion laws towards Black people and people of color. The historical exclusion is still represented in land ownership in the state. And I think this acknowledgement is just a small piece of the work that all of us try to do. That allyship is an action, and I try to reflect it in the way that I do work myself in my relationships and also with my teaching practices and my lessons with students. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And let me share with you a little bit about this book. And maybe, my goal is that, and my intention is that you'll be able to listen and maybe learn some things that challenge you as an educator, as a parent, as a community member, maybe get some ideas about some things that you really want to implement, maybe to get a project started, or just another way to engage with kids outside, whether it's in a garden or inside doing gardening activities. So that's really my goal. And I hope that your takeaways are questions. And I'll have my information at the end if you want to continue a conversation with me. And so the book came from, just as the background of the book, I had been working in farms and gardens, but when I started working at this K-8 charter school, they approached me and they said, okay, we want a garden educator, we want a garden program, but we want it to be science focused, permaculture focused. It's got to be production, farming as well. We have to be able to produce food for the cafeteria, and we want kids to be in it every week from kindergarten to 8th grade. And I was so excited. So I said yes to everything. And then I took all the information and I sat down and I thought, how am I going to combine all of these things into a program? It's huge. I don't even know where to start. And the idea of merging science and permaculture seemed really kind of baffling to me, because when I thought of science, I kind of thought of like reductionist science, where you really take apart the pieces. And that was kind of like the old school science that I had learned, of just like, kind of taking things from the whole and breaking it down farther and farther. And then in my mind, permaculture was this more holistic, like very philosophical, slow process of really paying attention to things. And what came out of that was realizing that environmental education is a perfect, like if I had a Venn diagram of permaculture and science, environmental education is really right in the middle. And the key to that is, like, the tool for that is observation. That's something that both permaculture and science share. And so in the book, it's permaculture inspired. I'm not a trained permaculturist, but I did study the principles and try to incorporate a lot more of the holistic perspectives and themes into the book, and to merge it with science. And so observation is a key thing that comes into that. A sense of wonder is grown out of observation with students and with children, just naturally through observing, especially in kind of patterns, like repeatedly, they develop this sense of wonder. And through that, they also develop a sense of personal connection. So that's kind of like the philosophical journey behind this. And then I took this and I created the structure, and I'll share with you kind of the steps to do that in order to kind of create this K-8 guide. I set some goals for myself from the beginning, and one of them was that I really wanted to have a progressive garden experience for the students, so that they could grow in their knowledge, and that the gardening activities they had reflected their personal growth from being a young child to a teenager. And so that's also incorporated into my program, is really trying to focus on building skills every year that reflects their growth. So let me share with you a little bit of this, like, tips and tricks that I used. I found this image, this graphic and I think I really like this kind of triangle with 3 arrows that are cycling through. And the reason why is that when I develop any curriculum, I kind of start at the top of that triangle in this large space, and then I work my way down to a kind of a narrow space. So it's like an inverted triangle. And the large section is really my philosophy, my pedagogy, my intentions, and my goals. And then I get farther and farther down into more specifics down to the lesson plan. But I really like this graphic because it cycles back, because you're always kind of returning back and checking back in with those philosophies. And I do this when I'm building any lesson plan. You know, I check back in with what's the goal? Are students observing? How is this lesson creating a personal connection? And so I'm always kind of like cycling back to those big things. The image on the other side is this heart that's created out of plant starts. And this was one of my last days of teaching at the school. And these were the students that I had been teaching for 5 years. And they surprised me. They were transplanting those plants into the garden. They surprised me with this gift. And it just perfectly matched this image of like my basic philosophy around lesson planning and building curriculum. So on the top of that tier, in one of the broader sections, I really focus on ecosystem thinking. Again, that's like the middle of that diagram between science and permaculture, is really thinking in ecosystems. And so there's a graphic of a sun, and there's lines connecting, and one of the line has like a person and a little rabbit, and the other line has plants. And I think that graphic, and they're all kind of pointing towards the sun, that graphic really shows the kind of ecosystem thinking that it's pretty commonly taught of like things are connected, maybe like a food web, or what's a producer and what's a consumer, what's a predator and what's a prey. Those are usually the relationships that we see when we talk about ecosystems. We're talking about how the hawk relates to the mouse, and the mouse eats the grass, and so on and so forth. And we kind of create these lines. But what I really want to challenge is ecosystem thinking that involves very complex relationships. And so what I have below that is the image of a spider web. And so I want us to start thinking about ecosystem thinking in this terms of a spider web, of these many layered connections, just like a spider's web, to all these different pieces. And so I have a picture of a worm, and I also have a picture of a native pollinator on a calendula. In a spider web perspective, we would be thinking, what's the relationship between the worm and the pollinator? It's not usually the story that's told, but it's just as valuable as other relationships in our garden and in our outdoor spaces. And these are conversations that we can have with kids, like asking that, what is the relationship between the worm and the pollinator? How do they have a relationship in a garden space? Because we know they do. And you can add other elements to that as well that may be less obvious. And another thing that comes up with ecosystem thinking too is like kids really start to think about their place in that ecosystem and their sense of responsibility to that place. When I've done web design before with kids where they're moving their bodies and they each have a piece of an ecosystem, and one of the kids, there was one time she was the human in the whole ecosystem, and she just kind of stood there and she was like, I don't really know where I belong. She's like, do I even belong in this ecosystem? And that's a really valuable question. And I was so amazed that she's 8 years old and she's thinking this thought of, and so we can have a conversation around that of, yes, you have a place, but what does it look like? What relationships do you want to have? We have a choice. And so really starting to think about ecosystems, and this can be reflected in lesson plans as well, either through the conversations we're having, the observations, or the progression of lessons. So another commitment I made when developing this curriculum was to move from standalone lessons to consecutive ones. And part of that came from necessity, where I had 30 classes that I was going to teach for each grade. And it seemed like a much more valuable use of everyone's time if those built off of themselves towards something greater, rather than just planting garlic, just planting peas, just mulching the compost, if there was a thread that tied all of these lessons together. And this is something that I encourage organizations who I've consulted on curriculum development in gardens, is even if it's 2 lessons or 3 or 4, ask yourself, what is the thread that connects this? What is the story that's being told when we're out in the garden? What's the story that we return to? We all know that storytelling is a really powerful, and oral tradition has always been a really powerful way to communicate knowledge and wisdom and cultural lessons. So include that storytelling aspect by creating opportunities to return to story through consecutive lessons. So part of that is connecting to our human traditions, but it also is really mimicking natural cycles by building and growing on a subject. It is helping children develop a sense of natural change and seasonality, because they're going to be returning to the same space and they're going to be noticing changes. And this was really interesting, and kind of returning to the subject to prepare for this presentation, I realized that a lot of the concerns that I have in my book, of too much screen time, staying inside, disconnect from the natural world, like, I wrote this before the pandemic. I never could have anticipated that our world would look the way it is. And so I think this regular engagement is more critical than ever. And now it's providing a healing space for children and a comfort to return to in a very rapidly changing world that can be really overwhelming. I notice that right now with my students that I'm teaching, is that they have so much more social anxiety, their stress levels are up. A lot of them are really struggling with depression, but they love going out to our greenhouse, and even just to get outside, and also just to see what's happening, and to notice the changes that might have occurred. So it can really be a healing space for students and children that need it. So those are kind of some of the big commitments that I've made. And then the focus for me was how do I make that into manageable steps? And so for myself, I just focused on seasons. That made the most sense for the school schedule I was working with. And it just helped kind of focus me into getting a little bit smaller down that triangle of, okay, let's break this up into something manageable. So these are some of the themes that I've focused on for each season. I took each season, and then I listed out some general themes to help me focus under those seasons even more. And for some reason, 4 was the number I came up with each of these. So you're going to see 4 bullet points of kind of my focuses for each season. So with a lot of school gardens and a lot of gardening programs, fall is where we begin, which I really love that, because a lot of gardening activities for people start with planting seeds. That just seems to be a very logical thing. People, get the soil and we plant the seeds, and that's how we start teaching gardening. But I love starting in the fall, because we're starting with this abundance, and it's a place for children to really imagine what's there, to engage with it, to identify and start developing that really critical relationship. They can start to notice the patterns and change of moving from summer to fall to winter. And it's a really good time to practice seasonal activities. So seed saving, planting bulbs, mulching, preparing the garden for winter. I always encourage people to repeat these lessons, because you can build on their complexity as children get older, and they develop that sense of seasonality by engaging in these seasonal tasks. So in this picture, we have a student who's offering a watermelon that grew rampantly under some of our tables. And because this is a freshman, started high school, found this watermelon, now is extremely excited by the possibility of getting more food and more watermelon. And even if there's not a garden space that is abundantly producing or there for children to explore, when I first started this garden at the K-8 school, it was just this massive weed patch, and there was nothing to harvest, and it was full of thistles, so it was really prickly. But I had a few brave students, and I opened the gates because they had been locked, and I opened the gates, and the brave ones started to come in, and they started to like kind of tromp down little pathways, and their pathways kind of got a little wider, and then more timid students came in and felt a little bit more comfortable. And those pathways that they created became the pathways that were established permanently in the garden, and they naturally reflected the way that children move curiously through the world. They found rabbit nests under the thistle, and they found caterpillars, and they found this whole life that existed in there. And so really, there's a lot of room for exploration and discovery, I think, if we followed children's leads, in their world. So for fall, these are kind of my 4 focal points when I'm approaching any lessons, is to make sure that these are included. If I could teach gardening in any season, it would be winter, which is really not the common thing. But I love winter for so many particular reasons. And a lot of it has to do with failure. When we're growing gardens, and what the school had done, production, I realized that production really wasn't going to happen in this sort of web perspective. But what could happen is that children could learn in like a risk-safe space. By growing inside, they could grow on windowsills, they could watch how seeds sprout and not be concerned about a crop failing or not doing it right. And that's why I love winter so much, because it's really a time to experiment, to delve deep into a theme or a subject and really get to know it. They can do research, they can read books, they can watch movies, they can just really get into something. And I think a lot of our human natural cycles are like that. We kind of go inward during the winter. And so we can do that with gardening. We can go really into a theme or a subject and ask questions, and really start to get a better sense of an ecosystem and a relationship, that place of humans within an ecosystem. You can really start to cultivate that by taking the time to dive into these experiments and make observations. So in this picture, we have a bunch of seeds that are being started, and some of them are germinating, some of them aren't, but that's okay, because we're experimenting, and it's not critical to the garden's success. It's the time to explore. And then that brings us to spring. So in the fall, we've explored, we've done these seasonal tasks, we've started to get into a theme, and then in the winter, we really dive into it. We're experimenting and we're trying new things. And then in the spring, that's when it comes out of the classroom and outside. So for me, that means applying solutions to identified problems, innovating, different tasks. So, if maybe the soil is really dry, and 3rd graders who are learning about soil health are concerned about water retention or the health of the soil ecosystem, this is when they can apply different mulching practices and try it in different beds or different potting containers. They can apply cover crops to try to increase nutrients, and they can learn about sort of the, kind of applying that ecosystem's perspective, like really learning about the interdependence of the creatures that inhabit a garden space, and then trying to create habitat for them to increase their populations. So this is really the application of knowledge, and a really key time for students to become the agents of their learning, to come up with ideas and try to apply them, and then to vocalize them to the community. This is where they become little master gardeners in a sense, because this is where they're taking ownership of all of that deep learning that they've been doing. And I didn't include this in the book. I just follow fall, winter, and spring, but I am adding summer to this because I just thought I wanted to mention it a little bit. Summer looks different for everyone. I've never seen something that you can replicate. Like, it's always fit to the needs of your community and your school. When I was working at the rural school, it was really hard to get volunteers out for the summer. And so most of the work that I did was just about getting a couple volunteers or maybe a teacher here and there, but just trying to maintain it for the fall, just trying to like harvest the beans so that more beans would produce so that kids could have beans in the fall, and just kind of doing that maintenance. Right now I'm living in town, and our greenhouse is in town, so we have access to a lot more comings and goings of students and families. And so there's a summer work program with students in our special education programming, and they can do some of the work too in the maintenance. So it really kind of depends on your needs and your community. But I would recommend, there's a few ways that you can kind of prepare your garden for summer. And so some of the things to consider is planting perennial plants rather than annuals. Perennials typically need a little less water depending on what you're planting. Focusing on native plants that are adapted to your region. And I think really focusing on soil health, like thinking about or adding organic matter, using mulch, doing some water retention strategies around soil health will really kind of maybe solve some of the key issues around watering or keeping your plants moist in the summer. So all of that is what kind of created this curriculum outline. And so what you'll see here is a kindergarten to 8th grade progression. And then I gave each grade or age group a theme because it was a lot easier to organize garden lessons this way. So from an introduction to gardening, where kindergartners are just learning what things are and their relationship to it and how to use it, to seeds, to pollinators, to soils, vermicomposting, composting. I put rain gardens in there. You can also do pollinator gardens. You can do native plant gardens. And then 7th and 8th graders, it's this balance between learning these higher level things like renewable resources and leadership, but they're also starting to become the teachers of younger grades and younger students, and really starting to develop their own projects as well. So in the fall, I have the themes of pattern and change, winter, discovery and observation, and then spring, community and interdependence. So that's how I used all of those commitments and those focuses to develop the structure to create the curriculum. And then from there, that's when I get to the fine-tuned lesson plans and activities. So I was committed to 10 lessons per season for each grade. So 30 lessons total. And for me, I really had to, again, kind of cycle back to the top of that triangle, think about what my core principles were at the heart of these garden lessons, and really make sure that they were shown in them. And so this is when I really relied on an ethic of care. And that's the language of care for self, care for others, and care for the land. So for example, I had so many examples. I made myself pick one of each. I would say right now, my ethic of care is I model the behavior I want to see from my students. That's how I care for myself, is modeling the behavior. When I don't model the behavior and students act and children act in a certain way, and I get frustrated, that's not really caring for myself. Like I'm kind of creating that stressful situation. So this is a way that I can care for myself, is modeling this behavior. I care for others because I want the garden space to be accessible to every child's physical, mental, and emotional needs. And this is something that I'm really growing towards. I have a lot of work to do and a lot of learning to do in this, but that's how I can care for others. And I can care for the land by prioritizing soil health in every activity. You know, in the winter, are we stepping on the soil? How are we engaging with it? Are we protecting it? Are we just letting the soil ecosystem, be healthy and kind of do its thing in the winter? How are we feeding it in the spring? How are we preparing it for summer success? And in the fall, how are we preparing it for winter success? So in all of your lessons and activities, I would challenge you to consider what your core beliefs and principles are, and write that down or have it up, or really articulate it in a way that you can return to and just check in with yourself about that. And then these are also 3 kind of key questions I ask myself when I am doing strategic planning for my lessons. How will the garden be the heart of your community? What are the social expectations in the garden? And what are your short and long-term goals? When I was working at that K-8 charter and I was given all of these ideas and all these things to work on, the language that people would talk to me about the garden space in was really disparaging and really hopeless. They were, like, we tried this and it didn't happen. And then we tried this and this didn't work. And it was very negative. And I kind of had to sit with that for a little bit and think, you know what, I don't think they've ever talked about the garden in a positive way, because they've never had somebody to kind of tie all those pieces together and to make that vision come true. So writing down their ideas and then really separating what was a short-term goal and a long-term goal was really helpful. But then accomplishing those short-term goals really started to change that language in the community, because they could see that some of those things were happening. What they had before was this mix of long-term and short-term, and they were all kind of getting mixed together, and there was really no celebration around the goals either. When they did accomplish them, it was always kind of focusing on the thing that's not done or what's next. And so really celebrate the goals as they come and separate this. And honestly, I think this will really help if you're working collaboratively with other people. I just found this, even though I wrote this, I recently was reminded of its importance working with people in our greenhouse, volunteers and other coworkers, and realizing that we weren't on the same page about what our values were. And it would have, I think having this conversation earlier would have solved us a lot of tension. And so I highly recommend taking the time to do this. And then also, once you can identify your short-term goals, you can kind of use a backwards design. You can have it there, and a long-term goal. You can see it, and then you can figure out what the steps it's going to take to get to that goal, and then use those steps to build your lesson plans. So if your goal is to create a pollinator garden, you can think about all the steps you're going to need to get there, and each step can be a lesson. When it comes down to really the fine tune of like the activity structure, these are 3 things that I highly recommend. Is share your objective with the kids that you're working with. Let them know what the overall goal is and what the intention is. It's really going to help them contribute to making that intention happen, and making that a reality, and allows them to be agents of their own learning and more committed to it. So share what the point is and what the purpose is. That's one thing that I've really noticed about students who are coming back to school in this pandemic, is some of them are really confused about their purpose. And I think that's true for just children, but especially right now, that they need a lot of purpose, they need an intention. And so allow them to participate in that. And start with what they know. That's another way to build their ownership of their knowledge, is engage them in conversation and ask them to really start thinking about asking questions and thinking about what they don't know about a subject. And then I always end with a reflection. We can call it an assessment as well, but really a reflection. One thing that I've noticed working in special education is that sometimes people think that the activity is enough for a child to really comprehend its importance, or the lessons, or the messages, or the learning. And that's just not true for a lot of people. We need time to sit and to reflect and to absorb. And so I highly recommend creating that space for students after an activity to come back and to really reflect on it and to create more meaning. And it's also that place where that storytelling element can come in. So the why are we doing this, and what was important, and what can we do next? If I was to provide you with any takeaways, I would say let children be in charge. If you are in an organization or a group where maybe you have a garden committee, or there's a group that's involved, invite children to be a part of it. They have beautiful ways of seeing the world that adults sometimes we really lose, and we focus on the product of things rather than the process. And I think children are very much able to tap into that process a lot more, and they have some gorgeous ideas. So let children be in charge, listen to them when they share their opinion. that for me, gardening it's an experience. And so let children be a part of that experience and to build their own experience, because you're going to be setting them up to be better agents of change, and just leaders later on in life. I also have determine a yield. A yield is a permaculture term, but with working with children, a yield doesn't just refer to like how many pounds of produce you have. It can be books read about a subject. It could be seeds planted, amount of time spent in the garden. When I was working with that school and people were really kind of frustrated about things not happening, they set some really like manageable short-term goals. And the kindergarten teacher, she said, I just want every child to plant one seed. And I thought we can make that happen, because they hadn't really done that before. And so that was her yield, was at the end. I mean, the kids had planted more than one seed. They planted like just dozens and 100 seeds. And so we were able to celebrate that. So determine what your yield is. It could be a harvest celebration and you're growing food for it. I really love community events. And so decide what it is that you want to reach and what your yield's going to be, and then celebrate that when you accomplish it. I would also recommend to look around your community. There might be people that you would never consider to be interested in what you're doing or supportive, but look for people who can help you accomplish your goal. It might be really unexpected. And always create ritual and celebration. That's, again, part of that storytelling element is ritualizing, returning to subjects, and celebrating what you've accomplished. And not even accomplished, just celebrate being together outside or in a garden or having learned something. I think this is really key for building a culture, and children, they crave that. They crave meaning and purpose. And so we can do that by creating ritual and celebration. I just want to end with a quote from Lily, again, the same student who started. And this was after some time working in the garden. We interviewed her again, and this is what she said. She said, after it came together, the garden, it just felt like we were a community, and it felt like we were doing really cool stuff that was going to help out people in the future. So I just want to end on Lily's note and to offer resources and my favorite photo of a student. If you want to get in contact and continue a conversation, please do so. And here's the resources to do that. All right, Jade, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Kaci-Rae. That was so beautiful. I just feel, yeah, like that feeling of when you do see things, that seeds you've planted come out of the ground. It's just that beautiful, warm, fuzzy feeling that you've created something, and your entire presentation gave that to me. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lots of positive comments in the chat box there, and it was really lovely and very moving to focus on the stories of children and how valuable their thoughts are. It's so lovely. Okay, so any more questions, pop them in the chat. Faheen is busy beavering away in the background, collecting them and popping them into the worksheet for us. And I'm going to ask you some questions, Kaci-Rae, but for those of you, please stick around. It's 1:45. We're going to finish on the hour, but we are going to have prizes at the end. So we have 2 copies of Kaci-Rae's book to give away, and also a couple of Take Me Outside t-shirts. I'm modeling one from the Take Me Outside store as well. So keep coming with us. Okay, so questions. Linda asked, would this book be useful for an outside preschool program?
Yes. Yeah. So even though it is organized as kindergarten to 8th grade, the way that it really is, like, I would even recommend this to an adult. I recommend it to a preschool program. It's really centered as like a beginning gardeners to a more advanced gardeners. So you might find there's a place where you would have to change the language to fit a preschool program, but it's really centered towards beginners, and that's beginners of any age.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Having looked at it, I definitely think it would be extremely valuable for a preschool program. Okay, Andrew asks, how do you recommend starting a curriculum with older students who may have missed the earlier but very important lessons?
Yeah, I'm kind of experiencing that now and realizing how spoiled I was to work for so long with the same group of kids and have them develop that. Um, and I think that's really starting with where they're at. And it is amazing to me how starting an early education program, it really changes a child's life and, in like eating or the way they engage with the world. And so I noticed that with some of my older students, they're less likely to taste test something or try something if they're new to the program. So, but just start with what they know and see what they are really interested in. They might surprise you with what they have been learning on their own or what they've been exposed to outside of that.
I found with older students doing something like every kid loves French fries. So we grew potatoes. And that was like a massive thing to even just break down where this common thing came from. And it just sort of connected into the world
Mm-hmm.
that they liked, right? Good question.
Yeah.
Okay, Anna says, if you had a mixed age group, which theme, focus, or lesson would you recommend? Is there something that you'd be like, this can work?
I mean, if I could just teach worms for the rest of my life, I'd be pretty happy. That's my go-to. Like, it's probably one of the biggest empathy building activities and themes that I've ever engaged in. And so I would recommend starting there. Like that's great for any age that you're working with, especially mixed. It's just you can get the science, you can get the technical stuff, but then you're really getting in there and developing a relationship with something that most people don't have relationships with. And then I haven't had a class that hasn't turned into worm advocates after engaging with it. So that's where I would start.
Those happy little decomposers hiding under there. Do you know the answer? Is this right that all of the like earthworms in Canada were destroyed in the last glacial, or they got scraped off by all the glaciers and they were reintroduced by that?
I don't know. I mean, I do know that there were worms that came and were like something about the Mayflower brought in, but I'd be really fascinated to know.
Yeah, all right, I'll do some more research. We can circle back.
Someone says earthworms are from Europe. Cool.
Yeah, Europe. Okay, Alison, is the seasonal cycle and grade span continuum available in a book or on your webpage? It is.
It is.
It's in the book.
Yes. The picture that I had, it was a little wonky. It's because I had to take a picture of it. I didn't have a scan. So that is in my book. It's got the whole cycle. And then at the beginning of each chapter, it lists out all 10 lessons that you can expect for each season.
Amazing. And again, we are a charitable nonprofit store. So if you buy it with us, all of the money goes back into hosting these workshops and making sure that we can take kids outside. Randomly, just tucking back to the worm thing, Zakir says, but what about the worms that were not under ice, like in the South and Midwest of Mexico? I don't know. I'm literally going to go out and do some worm research, some historical worm search, and we'll try and follow up in an email to keep you guys informed on the worm saga. Okay, Lisa asked, is there a go-to plant that you plant each year that's just amazing?
Personally, peppers are like the biggest divas in the plant world, I think, but I can't stop trying to grow them. It's a love and love relationship, but they don't really love me back. They always grow and then they stop with their 2 leaves and then they just stay there for a couple weeks and then they decide to grow. My mother grows amazing peppers, so I usually try to grow mine and then I take hers, and they're gorgeous. So that's personally, but with children, peas are just really neat because when you soak them, you can still open them, or beans, like anything that you can, like a dicot, like you can just open it up and see inside, and you can eat it or you can plant it. I think big seeds like that, it doesn't matter the age, they always get really into it. And so personally, I choose the fussy plant, but with children, I choose the one that can, sprout really fast and they can eat. And yeah, I would choose peas.
Amazing. Thank you. Marley asks, is your book all about food gardening, or are there sections about growing pollinator or native plant gardens, for example?
Yes. Yes, I would say in all the gardens that I grow, 70% of the space is devoted towards pollinators. And 30 of that is towards like vegetables. And so there's a lot about ecosystem supports, habitat building, whether it's building habitat or planting plants. And so there's a really large push towards pollinators and habitat building. And then the entire 6th grade lessons are on rain gardens, or how to build a space, so that you're creating more ecosystem space and you're supporting that. But rain gardens can also be pollinator gardens or butterfly gardens, but something specific to whatever it is that your region needs.
I was muted. I wasn't. Beautiful and so all-encompassing. It's so diverse, the topics that can be covered.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, the garden, like a producing garden, is just a piece of this larger ecosystem. And so when I work with students in the garden, I want them to consider what role does the garden have, our garden have, in the larger ecosystem surrounding it, with birds and predators and water, things like this. And it needs to be a piece of the larger spiderweb.
Love the spiderweb. And they're so beautiful when you see them in nature, and you're just glimmering in the lights, magic. Okay, Lynn asks, have you collected any data on the impact of the curriculum? Like, are you doing anything qualitative on the other side?
I have not, but I would be very interested to know more about that. Right now, I've been just getting sometimes feedback about how people are using it, or how it's been applied, but I haven't had any data yet about it. That would be great.
I know that we've got someone on the call, certain Megan Zenny, who's also doing amazing research around gardens and stuff. So I would say that there exists, or is now being developed, great research that shows how important these kind of garden curriculums or approaches to pedagogical approaches are to the social, emotional, physical, academic well-being of our students. So
yeah, absolutely.
Lena asks, would this book be useful for Florida? We don't really have seasons, honestly. Our planting time is in fall and harvest in spring. Summer is for resting. Resources are usually catered for northern states. Not sure if this is the case too. We're widening our audience. It's so interesting. Thanks. Great question.
It is a great question, because this is from a northern perspective. Because when I talk about seasons, I'm using the seasons as I know them in Oregon. And so I will say that, like, my dream is that when people have a copy of this book, I want it to like be scribbled all over. I want it to be like messy and lessons to be moved. And like, if you were to scribble out winter and write summer or something, like just do whatever you need to do to make this, like, this is just a foundation, I hope, to launch some new ideas and to get you thinking of garden lessons, but like mess it up, tear it up, write all over it, make it your own. That's really how I envision it. It's just a launching space. And I recently, at the beginning of the year, I did work with a school in Tampa, and they bought the books, and they wanted to kind of adapt it. And I learned some really fascinating things about Florida that I didn't know, like how you really have to use different types of worms if you want to compost. That composting can be really difficult because the humidity, that there's just a lot of other considerations, the year-long gardening. It's just, things that I had never considered because of my northern, US perspective. But I would still recommend it, not just because I'm really proud of this book, but because I would love to hear how you could adapt this to a different space. Like, please challenge my perspective, and let me know what it is that you're doing.
Amazing. Okay, I'm going to press pause so we can do a soft close, do some prizes, and then there's still more heaps of questions coming in, so we'll answer questions for about another 10 minutes afterwards, and then we will cut it at 15:15 at the latest, just to let everybody and appreciate, be grateful for everyone's time. There's so much great information coming in, and like Arlene said about more southern states, they do okra, sweet potatoes, perennials, just really cool. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us again. Beautiful presentation, and we'll do a real thank you at the end. And we've got some prizes coming up, but first, just let you know, we do still have a few workshops left in this series. So May 12th, we've got Walking Forward, Indigenous Perspectives in Learning from Place with Gillian Judson and Heidi Wood. May 26th, we're learning about reducing food waste with Eco Schools Canada and food cycle science. June 9th, more Indigenous learning resources for educators and learners with our Indigenous partners, of which we have many. And March 3rd, April 7th, May 5th, and June 2nd, we host monthly Campfire Connections. These are virtual gatherings with the Global Environmental and Outdoor Education Council and outdoor learning partners with Take Me Outside, where you can chat, connect with other educators, and really delve into some of the great things that you're doing, and talk about maybe things that, barriers or struggles, and how you overcome them. We're going to pop the link to the workshops in the chat for you, and the link to Kaci-Rae's fantastic resource. I use it all the time with my own students, so slightly biased there. Okay, and so on to the prizes. So we've got 4 gifts to give away. The first 2 are copies of the School Garden curriculum. So first one's just a question, and the second one I'm going to ask you to type, but you are going to type in the chat, and it's going to be first in, best dressed, as we say, or first person to type the correct answer. So fingers at the ready. My first question is, which season does Kaci-Rae say is the best season to start doing garden work? I have, where am I going? I've got to go all the way back up. Lisa Mitchell, congratulations. One of the books is yours. Thank you so much. Okay, the next one for the next copy of the School Garden curriculum. Okay, so if you take the 3 letters at the beginning, you have SGC, the School Garden curriculum. I'd like you to write me those 3 words. Don't hit enter between, but I'd like you to give me an S, a G, and a C word that are related to what you've learned in this workshop, or something that you feel about it. So don't hit enter between. 3 words. First one begins with S, second one begins with G, third one begins with C, to learn about your inspiration. Oh, scrolling. So many great answers, people. Here we go. Hang on. Safe community grows. Nice, Yana. I'm gonna, your second. Kristen Lewis, you have won a Take Me Outside t-shirt for super great community. And our last prize goes to Alison Mevis for School Garden curriculum is a super great connection. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. That is it for the prizes, I'm afraid. But everybody that registered in your email will get a 5% discount code for the store, and you can utilize that to buy Kaci-Rae's book if you so desire. Please check your spam. Right after this, I upload the recording and we send you a follow-up email. If you haven't got it by lunchtime tomorrow, please check your spam. It should be in there. There's the recording link. There's a very short Google form you can fill out that you'll get a certificate of attendance. That also, once you fill that in, is instant and might go into your spam. So have a look there as well. And we'll send follow-up links to resources. Thank you so much for all that have joined us. If you do need to leave, we totally understand, but we're going to dive back around into questions for a few minutes here. Okay. My gosh, the list is quite long. Kaci-Rae, let's see how we go.
There's so many good ones. I was looking at them. Yeah,
there's so, okay.
Thank you, everyone, for putting in such lovely things. This is filling my heart.
Okay, Karen asks, we are starting our garden from scratch in the fall. Where do you recommend we start? The garden will be in raised beds in our new outdoor classroom. Exciting. We're in Canada, so not much will grow over the winter.
Yes. So I would recommend starting with a quick growing crop like radishes, some lettuces, kale, something that's a little cold hardy that might be able to survive a little bit of the transition. And that will be a hook to get kids excited about what can happen in the spring. So something really fast. And then definitely after that, start mulching, start preparing the garden for the winter.
Beautiful. Great answer. Okay. Ali, what is a good plant for preschoolers to grow indoors in the winter season? Winter being Canada with snow and -30 for temperatures for many months.
Yes. Well, it depends on what you want to do with the kids. Do you want them to eat it? Do you want them to just watch it grow? Is this something that you're going to be moving outside later? So the crop kind of depends. If it's to watch it grow, I recommend beans. They're really, really cool the way that you can see them open, and they're just very dramatic in the way that they grow. If it's something that you want to later plant outside, you could be doing some, let's think.
On the iPad, get to there. I asked you to stop for
Some kales or lettuces, and trying to think of something else. You know, most things will grow well except for like tomatoes and really warm weather crops. So I would be looking at some cold weather crops that might be able to withstand some temperature fluctuations, especially if it's next to a window. There might be some cold air coming in, and yeah, something that you can really observe. I prefer when I'm planting things with kids in the winter, I'm doing it strictly for observation. So sometimes planting different types of seeds to see the germination rates of different ones, and then to watch the way that their leaves unfold and how it looks. You know, this could be a great comparison study for you too.
Beautiful. Susan asked, are there any faster growing plants, particularly food or pollinator plants, that you would recommend for a short growing season? I guess like you said about lettuce and radishes are fast.
So like quick flowering plants. I was just having this conversation with students today because I'm not as flower literate as I am food literate. Or like the nasturtiums that I'm growing are growing remarkably fast. And I'm always a fan of marigolds. You know, I had a student suggest morning glories, which can be invasive depending on where you're at. But I would recommend if anyone else like who's here could put some in the chat box. I would love to learn from our community here about that.
Borage, zinnias, cappuccinas. I don't know how to pronounce that, honestly. Everyone's saying zinnias. Marigolds,
calendula, borage. Yeah, borage is a good one.
Someone was saying, Arlene said microgreens for indoors for the previous question as well. I liked that.
That's a great idea.
Echinacea for the monarchs. Cool. Evening primrose. Very cool. Okay, somewhere to start. Heidi asked, for me, are Bugs and Slugs field guides available in French? Not at this moment. They're in English with the Latin names. We're working on more French resources for the store. Watch this space. Yana asks for you, Kaci-Rae, have you been able to infuse Indigenous education with your lessons? We want to ensure we use an equity lens with our community garden, but want to keep it authentic.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because this is something that I'm wrestling with right now. Of like, I'm developing new curriculum for a high school level, and my goal is to begin with that lens, and then develop lesson plans from that, and always return to that lens. With the book that I have, I would say I had developed it, and then I kind of took that lens and looked at it, and so I still feel like this is a place to grow. And honestly, I would recommend really doing, like, I feel like this is something I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes. And I'm like, I should have done this. I could have changed this. Like, why didn't I think about this lesson? And I could have changed it to be more respectful. Like, like, for example, when in my book, I talk about the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, and I kind of lean like towards objectivity as being really positive over subjectivity. And now I really don't agree with that. Subjectivity is where culture comes from. It's where expression and personal story comes from. It's what makes us all unique, is our personal lens and the subjective way that we look at the world. And so that's something that I would change. And I would recommend for anyone else who's developing, is really like celebrating what it is that people bring and their stories. Either it's, from if you're working with Indigenous people, or you're working with anyone who has like a story that they want to share and they're bringing in, or a culture that they're going to share. Creating that space for it. I think I, in the past, had that science background, and it disengages culture from, it's like, we got to be over here and this is the world. And so really switching that around, I think, is key.
I also come from an environmental science background and struggle to decolonialize and take away that take away that, break everything down. It's not right unless it's written and prove, and so that's a massive thing for me. I do know that, for example, our local Indigenous support worker with our school district, they planted the three sisters, so corns, beans and squash, which have traditionally been used across Turtle Island, growing together because of the way they look after each other. And then also planting, doing a project on ethnobotany, and there's some really amazing like Métis resources, and on the store we have the medicines that made us. It's a book about that. And growing medicine plants, right? And they are people for Indigenous nations. So echinacea or lemon balm, or things that can be put into tinctures, or that are more what I guess I would link with sensory gardens of lavender and things that can be pressed. And I know that has been really successful with students in our school district. Sage, sacred plants, tobacco, obviously healing to sacred tobacco is different from the industrial one that is used. Cedar is really sacred as well, so even planting trees, or could totally.
Yeah, and I think for my comfort level, I just had a conversation with somebody about planting the three sisters, and I mentioned that my comfort level isn't to, I don't plant them unless because I don't think that I can accurately and fully see it from the perspective of of a religious practice or a traditional practice, or really capture the entire meaning behind it. And so for me, it's really important to develop a relationship with tribal members who could be able to express that, and that takes time. But that's a priority for me. So I don't feel like it's my place. I think there's other plants that we can talk about that with. And it sounds like, you're referencing like this is done with tribal members, and that there's ritual involved. And that's really important.
Yeah, that's an Indigenous-led practice. So super. Susan asked, are you familiar with Hope Blooms? I feel like that's
I am not
connected. I'm not either. So maybe you can type in the chat, Susan. Okay, we've got time for just a couple more, and I'm really sorry if I didn't get to you. But as Kaci-Rae said, you can contact, or you can reach out to me, and I can help support you. Rosalie asked, how can you avoid the white stuff that sticks on indoor plants and slowly kills it? I'm not sure if we know exactly what that. Do you mean mold? Like it's sort of when it gets moldy?
No. White stuff. I don't know. We had an aphid infestation in our greenhouse and a whitefly infestation. So I ended up doing a diatomaceous earth treatment. And I had to remove all the plants and start from scratch. But the diatomaceous earth was really, really useful.
And ladybugs eat the aphids, right? We have a local garden center that helps.
Yeah, we also tried ladybugs. Our students really wanted them. And so we got them somehow in the winter, and they all went into hibernation.
Oh, just right away. No, thank you. I'm too busy sleeping.
Yeah, they're like, I'm sorry, I want to go back to sleep.
I like that. Barb asked, I want to hear Kaci-Rae's garden story. How old were you? I'm going to say you should listen to our podcast. So if you go to outdoorlearningstore.com/podcast, I actually, along with Ian Shanahan, who runs Green Teacher, interviewed Kaci-Rae last year now, I guess, about, and we dive really deep into Kaci-Rae's background and your upbringing and your relationship to the garden. So find it there. Okay, so Barb, I've answered your question. And the last one is Karen said, do you offer a sample lesson from your book or anything like that? Or, we should just get the whole thing. You're going to love it.
If you do want a sample lesson, please contact me. And if you want to talk about any like current garden projects or staff trainings or anything like that, like please do contact me. I'm really excited to be a part of these conversations and to offer you resources, if you need them. Like recently I was contacted by somebody who couldn't access the free worksheets that are online. And so she just contacted me and I was able to connect with the publisher. And so she was able to get the resources that she needed. So please let me know. I only have like on my website, the schoolgardencurriculum.com, there's not a sample lesson, but I'll put one on. And there's also all of just the outline of all the lessons in the book.
I'm finding the link there for you to close on that. Really just amazing, and clearly so many inspired people and so much food for thought. Yes. So I just want to say thank you so much. I want to honor everyone's time and make sure that those who are later time zones and those who've been maybe on a screen, I would just absolutely thank you so much for joining us and for committing to outdoor learning with your students. And we'll say goodnight there. Thank you again, Kaci-Rae. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to answer a couple of questions here before I sign off, but I'm going to stop the recording.